On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at the organizational depth chart on defense.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild. We are your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, and we are your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we discuss the organizational depth chart on defense. We'll take a look at some of the names that are closest to getting a call-up and who else factors into the equation. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and we did this with the goalies last week, and then it got to be crossover time for many of our shows last week here on Locked On Wild. So we're bringing it back, just taking a look at the depth chart throughout the organization on defense. And before we get to the names in particular, let's just take a look at kind of how things are looking on D. And to say the least, everything is pretty well set at the NHL level on defense for the Minnesota Wild. Now, whether these players are fully healthy or play is one thing, but your current top 7 defensemen for the Minnesota Wild, in some order: Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Jake Middleton, Zach Bogosian, John Merrill, Declan Chisholm, and Brock Faber. So you're set with Spurgeon, Brodin, Middleton, Bogosian, Faber, and Chisholm, I think, as your starters, with John Merrill on the bench as the 7th defenseman as of right now. Now, the thing that we know about those guys, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin in particular, now that they are over 30, and in Spurgeon's case as well, getting to the 34-35 range, there is likely going to be some missed games this season. And, that's not a knock on the player. That's just a reality at this point. And it's not even necessarily specific to those players. There just are games missed every season. Depending on what team you look at, some teams deal with more injuries than others. And so having a backup plan, having players that can assist is going to be critical throughout the organization. But, the interesting thing as we look at the defense too, is that there isn't going to be a ton of flexibility, at least for the next couple of seasons. If we flip the page to next year, 2025, 2026, John Merrill is an unrestricted free agent. Would imagine he will not be returning because his playing time is going to be few and far in between. And depending on how some of the prospects do down in Iowa, it could be even fewer and further in between. Declan Chisholm is also a Group 6 UFA potentially. And what that means is when a contract ends with a restricted free agent status, that player becomes a Group 6 UFA if several conditions are met. So Chisholm signed the 1-year deal with the Minnesota Wilds to stick around for another season. And I think this is telling of where the Wild organization is at, especially on defense. Is, if these prospects down in Iowa take a big jump, then maybe there is less of a need to bring him back. But I think what that signifies most is that Zeev Buium is the true wild card in this entire situation. Because even if, let's say, John Merrill and Declan Chisholm both are not retained, they're not brought back, you have 5 defensemen already spoken for: Spurgeon, Brodin, Middleton, Bogosian, and Faber. And so you got 2 spots really on the NHL roster that can be looked at. But if we go with what has been kind of my sticking point all along, that Buium is going to sign his ELC once the Denver season is done, is going to burn a year of eligibility and get to the NHL level right away. So if you go with that, then that is another spot that is filled in this Wild D core. And so if, let's just say, to keep things simple, if Buium replaces Chisholm's roster spot, then the only one that is currently not spoken for is John Merrill's. Now, Zach Bogosian's kind of a wild card in this. He signed next season as well for $1.25 million. That's the 2025-2026 season. He signed for $1.25 million, but there's no trade protections. And so if the Wild find themselves in a situation this year where they are not in contention, well, I think it's likely then that spot gets opened up as well. And if that does happen, then all of a sudden you've got 5 players, counting Buium, spoken for. 5 spots on D spoken for. And so then you have 2 roster spots that allow for some competition to try to win jobs next season. So it's a D situation that is, for now, pretty full. But there will be some tables that will open up here before too long. And then, you get to 2026, 2027. That'll be the final year for Jared Spurgeon. So he may still be here. He may not. Jonas Brodin will be in the last 2 years of his deal. Jake Middleton and Brock Faber then would be the 2 mainly spoken for players. Add Buium into that mix. And so there's potential over the next 3 seasons that this D-core could look a little different for the Minnesota Wild. And I think that's something that everybody is perfectly fine with. As far as the players that could potentially lock those spots down, some of them are in situations where they're in the final year of their ELC. And so by that logic, you kind of want to see what those guys have to see if there's somebody that you are going to keep in the organization to potentially fill one of those spots. And so while there is a lot of certainty defensively right now, there will be potential for that to open up considerably here in the near future. So we're going to dive in, take a look at the names that could factor into this equation this year. If somebody gets hurt, what happens? Who is going to step in and fill those spots? Plus some other players that may be a little further away, but are still names to keep an eye on as well. All that is coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. It is the middle of the summer, and the Major League Baseball season rolls ever forward. The Minnesota Twins trying to keep pace in the American League Central Division, and there's really no better way to spend a gorgeous summer day than heading to Target Field and taking in a ball game. There are great vantage points all over Target Field, including something that I am extremely intrigued by: pontoon seats in right field. It just seems like a perfect match to head to Target Field and to grab a pontoon seat to watch a game. But the only way you can grab one of those pontoon seats is to head to Game Time. They make the ticket buying experience as easy as possible with great deals. And did you know ticket prices actually go down the closer you get to your selected event? Game Time also offers zone deals where you choose a section, and if you let Game Time choose the seats, you'll save even more. All this with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets that are cheaper, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen today, make sure you check out Locked On NHL. We have the full landscape of the NHL covered every single day of the week with our wide array of Locked On NHL hosts. You can find it on YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms, but if you're looking for more intel on the National Hockey League, none better than Locked On NHL. So let's take a look at some of the names that dot the organization from a depth chart perspective. And I want to start with the one I talked about him to kind of lead things off. I want to talk about Zeev Buium because, as I said, he's the ultimate, I think, wild card in this whole situation because he is somebody who can come in right away and vault up the leaderboard of this defensive depth chart because he is just that close to being ready to roll. I just want to go through and read the elite prospects bios for all of these players. We know a fair amount about Buium because of being drafted here in the 2024 NHL draft. But Buium scans ahead of each retrieval, plans his escape route in advance of collecting the puck, makes sure to draw in at least one forechecker, and then beats them with near comical ease, keying a clean breakout and activating into the rush. He is intelligent, deceptive, skilled, even creative in a part of the game where being efficient would suffice. And so Buium is going to go to Denver. Going to go through his sophomore season with the Pioneers. And once that is done, I'll say it again. I've said it 1,000 times. My position has not budged on this. Once the Denver season is done, Zeev is ready to hit the NHL level. He's going to go the same path as Brock Faber, which means that once the Denver season is done, he's going to sign his ELC, and he is going to head to the NHL level to get some experience so that then he can go into next offseason with a clear idea of what it's going to take for him to get to the NHL level full time and what he needs to work on, where he needs to improve most throughout the offseason. So that is the plan. And, while it hasn't been officially confirmed by the organization, we heard Brad Bombardier during development camp talk about how close he is, which further reinforces that, I think. And I can understand Bombardier saying, we don't want to put like a firm timetable on it. We kind of want to let the players, we kind of want to let the players be the ones that set how long that is going to take. But it's not going to be long. Like it's going to be however long the Denver season goes, and then we will see him after that. And so he may not be the first like call up name, but he will be called up this season for the Minnesota Wild. And so he, I think, tops the list in terms of the defensive depth chart and the players that we could likely see this season. Now, the other name, this is the guy that I think we will see this season if there are any sort of injury issues and need for a player to come up and to fill out the roster. Whether we like it or not, if there's any injury to the top six defensemen, it's going to be John Merrill that fills that spot. Now, if there are a couple of injuries, Daemon Hunt is going to be the first name that we see. And why do I say this? Well, we saw him last year. We saw him get 12 games with the Minnesota Wild last season, and he certainly shows some intrigue and some polish in his game to where he looked ready. He looked comfortable at the NHL level. And so I would be shocked if we don't get an opportunity to see him once again this year. So here's what Elite Prospects has to say about Daemon Hunt. Hunt explodes through his first two steps, demonstrating real discipline through his stride as he effortlessly generates a ton of power, skating the puck up ice. He closes gaps early, using backwards mobility to match the attacker's speed and funnels plays wide. He has the element of physicality and problem-solving skills to slow odd man rushes for support. We did see Daemon Hunt get some power play time with the Minnesota Wild, and so that is another part of his game that he brings to the table. He certainly has the offensive prowess to be able to help out there as well. Scored 17 goals with Moose Jaw in 2021-2022. The goals have not been as regular since he came to Iowa. Had 2 last in 2022-2023. And 3 goals this past season for Iowa. But that doesn't mean that, the goals aren't going to be there. It's just that, there are other parts of the game that are being focused on. And for a defense for Iowa that struggled all season, Hunt had the high water mark, I think, for plus minus with a -4. Daemon Hunt is in the final year of his entry-level contract. And so this is going to present an opportunity for the Minnesota Wild to try to see what they have. If they've got something worth keeping in the organization, then he'll get some sort of an extension after that. But at my position, again, with all these prospects, I would rather know what I have than have to just kind of kick the can down the road and guess. So it'd be great to see Daemon Hunt get a bunch of time on the Minnesota Wild roster this year, but I'll take getting somewhere between up to 15 games this year as an injury call up. If we get him somewhere around that mark, that would be really nice. But we'll just have to see what happens as the season unfolds. I do think, by and large, the D-core will be better this year because I think there's better direction for where they all need to go. And so as long as Daemon comes in and has a good season all around, if it's a good season played mostly at Iowa with a little bit of NHL time, that's a plus. As long as it's a good season, that's what we're looking for here. So Zeev Buium, fast track to the NHL level. Daemon Hunt, your most likely injury call-up if needed, if there are multiple injuries throughout the season. Those are the 2 names you'll probably hear the most about as this season unfolds. But who are the other names that we should be keeping an eye on as well? We'll talk about the other guys that make up the Wild defense organizational depth chart. There's got to be a better way to say that. That just does not roll off the tongue. The organizational defensive depth chart. We'll talk about some of the other players we should be keeping an eye on this year after this. One final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. As a reminder, make sure you hang out after today's show is done so that you can check out the first of its kind 24/7 streaming channel. Locked On Sports Today is bringing you all of your favorite teams, your favorite players, your favorite Locked On hosts. And the best part is it's actual conversation and not just 2 hosts yelling at each other across the table. Locked On Sports Today, and more particularly Locked On Sports Minnesota, bringing you 24/7 Minnesota sports access. So stay tuned for that after today's episode is finished. Let's get back to the conversation here by taking a look at some of the other names throughout the Wild depth chart organizationally that we will be keeping an eye on here this season. I'm going to go next to Jack Peart, who was drafted in 2021 in the 2nd round. Elite Prospects has this to say about Jack Peart. He skates with a heightened activity rate through his feet and uses crossovers to cut laterally and quickly close space while defending in transition. He keeps his feet stable through the neutral zone once he's established a gap with the closing opponent. Peart shoulder checks for options as he collects the puck, lasers deception onto his first touch, and sprints right past the first forechecker with ease. Peart is just started his ELC after playing at St. Cloud State. There were questions as to whether or not he was going to go back to St. Cloud State or was just going to take the leap and head to the Iowa Wild. He got the party started last year at the end of the year with a little bit of time with Iowa, and now his ELC officially kicks in, and he will be one of the names in the Iowa Wild level here throughout this season. He did have a goal and an assist through 9 games with Iowa at the end of last season. That was after 3 goals and 11 assists, 14 total points, 18 penalty minutes in 38 games with St. Cloud State this past season. So Peart, more of a defensive defenseman, but somebody who is just so fluid with his skating. It was impressive to see him do his thing at development camp, and he looks like just a more polished player that will certainly make an impact on the Minnesota Wild roster before all is said and done. Now, I would say his trajectory is going to be something along the lines of, I think he'll get this year 100% at Iowa for sure. Like, give him the opportunity to just kind of get acclimated and just get up to speed with the AHL level this upcoming season. As for the next 2 seasons after that, that depends on kind of the leap that he takes. The whole timeline got flipped by how a bunch of these defensemen played this past season in Iowa. Like, if somebody would have taken a step forward as opposed to just either kind of staying where they're at or taking a little bit of a step backwards, then all of a sudden you're looking at, some other name that we'll talk about here as the show moves towards its close. We would have been talking about one of those names getting an opportunity to see how they cut it at the NHL level. And so Peart has an opportunity here to kind of slide above the rest of the pack if he has a solid season in Iowa this year, which could then mean that, after a couple of names on the NHL roster move on or are not retained, that there will be opportunities for those guys to win spots in camp. So I would say for sure, I would put it very slim to none chance that we see Jack Peart in the NHL this season. Slim chance next year, 2025, 2026. I'll say that there's probably a chance that he becomes one of those injury call-up guys. And if he just continues to ascend, there's no reason to be on the roster. 7. So Jack Peart is I don't know if you guys heard that or not, but some sort of an ad popped up which just scared the bejesus out of me. But Jack Peart has the opportunity to vault to the front of the line if he has a solid season with Iowa this year. Next up, let's talk about Kyle Masters. Masters was drafted in 2021 in the 4th round. Here's what Elite Prospects has to say about Kyle Masters. He's a play planner, moving the puck, not to the most obvious target, but the one that creates the most favorable situation up the rink. He activates into the rush by filling space on the weak side as a trailer or becoming a forward in every situation. He sprints past his man, establishing body positioning if necessary, and adjusts his route and speed to become a passing option. So again, another kind of fluid skater for the Minnesota Wild organization. He played with the Iowa Heartlanders mostly last year. Had 4 goals, 15 assists, 19 total points. Also played 19 games with Iowa, 3 points in 19 games. It was a +3 as well. And so I would imagine for Kyle Masters, as we look at where he's at with his ELC, he's in year 2 of his ELC. again, it's all about kind of taking a leap this season. And so if Masters gets the whole year in Iowa, performs well, then he puts himself in position too to maybe be one of those injury call-ups in 2025, 2026. It's just all about just continuing to climb the hill. Like you're on a roller coaster and you're just continuing to, no matter if you're going super slow or if you are flying up to the top, it's all about just continuing to keep that trajectory going ahead. And so my expectation for Masters is that we maybe see him get in the mix for NHL games at the end of the 2025-2026 season. Because, again, he'll be in the final year of his ELC. If he shows that he's ready, it'd be nice to at least get a look to see what he's got at the NHL level. Arguably, probably the name that's getting the most discussion outside of Zeev Buium and Jack Peart is Carson Lambos, who was the second first round pick for the Minnesota Wild in 2021. After Jesper Wallstedt was taken 21st, he's taken 26th. And for Lambos, you look at what he did in Iowa this past year. He had 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points in 69 games, and 64 penalty minutes in those 69 games. He was also a minus 13. But as we've talked about, it was a struggle of a season for pretty much everybody at the Iowa Wild level last season. And so now we shift to just trying to kind of turn it around and get back on track. Elite Prospects says this about Carson Lambos. Lambos is a potent shooter with the skill and instincts to manipulate defenders and improve his shooting location. With and without the puck, he activates from the point, becoming a passing option and a scoring threat. He fakes shots and passes, waits for the defender to commit, then bursts into the space he created. Constant head fakes add another layer of deception. Lambos is currently in the second year of his entry-level contract. And I would put him on a similar vein, a similar path to where some of these other players are at. Let's just get back on track in Iowa. Let's have a successful season with the Iowa Wild and then kind of see how things go from there. But, the timeline for all these players, as we've talked about, has been kind of reset. Zeev Buium changed the whole thing. And so you don't have to necessarily rush a guy up to the NHL level, which is why this 2024-2025 season in Iowa is going to be so important, is because it is a full-out evaluation to see if last year was just kind of an aberration or if there's something to it. And if there's something to it with these prospects and they start to kind of, start to trend in a downward motion, that's where concerns and problems set in. So, and the other thing to keep in mind too is these are all still very young players. And so we're not pulling the plug on any of them as of yet. It's just, you just want to see like they all have it in them. They all have it in them to have a very solid year in Iowa. And if you see that from, several of them, that's going to make things go much, much better in Iowa. So I would say for Lambos, he'll get the full season unless something goes horribly, horribly wrong. He'll get the full season in Iowa. And then he also could be in the mix for some time in 2025, 2026, because that'll also be the final year of his entry-level contract. And for as highly touted as he is, it'd be nice to get a chance to see where he's at. But that's on his ability to bounce back after how this previous season played out. All right, we got 2 more names to get to here. Let's go to David Spacek. Spacek is also in the second year of his entry-level contract. And here's what Elite Prospects has to say about him. Uses space before shooting and turned a shot into a pass for a deflection from the point. Some weak side activation, but mostly compresses the zone by staying atop the circles. What he's definitely good at is one-on-one battles along the boards. Spot check this past season. Played in 61 games for Iowa. He had 3 goals, 9 assists, and 12 total points. Minus 16, and he had 21 penalty minutes. For spot check, his timeline is a little more interesting. I think he definitely gets this whole season in Iowa. But as far as a potential call-up goes, he's kind of in the mix with all those other players that we mentioned, and he's probably a little behind the likes of Lambos. He may slot in above Masters, but there are finite opportunities available to take playing time with this current D-core. And so, as with all the other players, it's just about him putting together solid film here in this second year of his ELC to put himself in position to get some NHL ice time maybe next season. I would imagine it's likely that he spends most of the time, if not all of it, at the AHL level, then gets some sort of an extension, 1 or 2 years, so that the Wild can see where he's at in his process. But that's incumbent on him getting back to that upward trajectory. So I would put Spacek probably third of the names, or even fourth of the names that we've talked about, because I'm not counting Zeev, because we already know how that's going to play out. But Peart, Masters, Hunt, and Spacek, I would put Spacek fourth on that list as far as pecking order for getting to the NHL level. And the final name that we'll talk about is Ryan O'Rourke. He is in the final year of his ELC with Minnesota. Listen to what Elite Prospects has to say about him. On the puck, O'Rourke is mean, nasty, violent. Everything one wants from a durable, robust, stay-at-home defender. His battle level is unbelievably high. He never takes a moment off, never mind a shift, and much less an entire game. O'Rourke is a capable puck mover, too. He consistently makes good decisions with the puck and boasts an absolutely lethal slap shot. I don't know if it was just the writing style of all those other profiles, but that kind of fires you up. And this past season, O'Rourke had 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 total points, 62 penalty minutes in 70 games, and was a minus 30 on the season. But if he's a force, if he is an aggressive player, plays mean, plays angry, that's the kind of stuff that can fast track you to the NHL level. And so I don't think with Buium, with Hunt entrenched as the 2 most likely names that we'll see this year, unless things go absolutely like off the rails and the Wild miss the postseason once again, then maybe you see him at the end of the season as an injury call-up or just as a call-up in general. This is going to be an interesting year for Ryan O'Rourke because he's got an intriguing skill set. If he can put it together, maybe he gets an opportunity next year to see what he's got at the NHL level. But I still would slot him in behind Buium and Hunt as far as where we'll see them and how soon we will see them. I would say Hunt will or O'Rourke will play most of the season, if not all of it, in Iowa this year. Get some sort of a little bridge contract, and next year we maybe get a chance to see him as well. But that is a look at the names most likely that we will be seeing. But don't forget the likes of Aaron Kiviharu. He is another potential fast tracker on this list. Sebastian Sione, another name. These are potential fast track names for the Minnesota Wild as well. And so those will be names that we keep an eye on as this season unfolds. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.